I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Well, what I want to do about it is continue the conversation that we were having from last episode and kind of have a deeper dive into kind of this religious fundamentalism that we're seeing prevalent in the world right now as we're in war, as we're transgressing as, United States against other countries in partnership with the transgression that Israel has been promulgating. And as we're seeing other major nations, transgressing against other people, like still what's going on with Ukraine. We don't talk about it as much, but it's still happening. Right. And all of the shifts and changes now that we're seeing, as Iran is pushing back against U.S. aggression at this period of time. So I want to, and all of this is being done with this kind of underlying current on religious fundamentalism and faith-based. And though our podcast is not one that's rooted in religion, it's really important for us to be talking about like what are some of the things that are motivating us today in our action. And I think that it's really important to be talking about how people are talking about this person named Jesus. I know in my community, there's a saying like, what would Jesus do in this moment? What
WWJD. Yes.
What would Jesus do? And how would Jesus be responsive to all the things that we're seeing? One things that we know demonstrated in the stories of the Bible is that when he was angry, when the Pharisees and Sadducees were using the church house in a way to increase themselves, and he went in and kicked everybody out the church in one of the Bible stories. So that if we're using the teachings as a model and not so much demonstrative of the actual human being, but like what being Jesus like is, some of the things that's happening with our administration today would be completely abhorrent in my understanding.
Yeah, I was raised, I think we've talked before, I was raised in the Episcopal Church, which Catholic light. And from me and my experience, my parents, my dad sang in the choir. My mom never really liked to go to church, but she went because it was expected. And, it was all about how nicely everybody was dressed and how well behaved people's children were. And I always thought it always felt very hypocritical to me because I was living in such trauma in my household, and then we would go to church. And I remember as a child thinking, does that happen for everybody's household where they do bad things all week long and then they go to church and all of a sudden they're better people? And it just, it never landed on me as being anything of authenticity because it was such a paradox in my own lived experience without even having the mind power to dissect that at all. But
I appreciate that truth for probably a lot of people. You behave one way, you can roll up out the club right into the church house the next day.
Yeah. And the whole concept of, in my household, my father sang in the choir, he was revered, whatever. And then he was abusing me in my household. And so we're going to do that all week long. And then we're going to go to church and you get absolved of all this. And then we go back and nothing changes. And I don't remember, I blocked out the memories. So I don't have memories of having these thoughts as a child. But I do remember feeling hypocritical and not taking it as authentic or real because it wasn't authentic and real within my own lived experience in my own household. So yeah. And then fast forward to adulthood, and I have my daughter, and we didn't go to church. And she said to me at one point, she was like 5 years old, and she said, "Mom, why don't we go to church?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. We're not church going people." And she's like, "Well, I want to go to church." She would tell me that I'm full of it right now because she's like a self-professed atheist, but she was like, "I want to go to church. I want to go to church." So So I found out from a friend about a church in my hometown at the time, which was Charleston, and it was Unity Church of Charleston, and so we went.
I went
And
to Unity too. Unity's
did
lovely.
you? Oh my gosh. Yeah, and
Yes,
it's still
Unity.
there. And I remember them talking about Jesus. I remember the first time the first time we went to a service, and the pastor, Reverend Ed, mentioned Jesus, and I had a visceral, like, physical reaction to hearing it, guttural and like a punch gut. And I started thinking, oh, this is not for me. I can't, I can't be here and listen to all of this. But he made a really good point. Maybe not in that first time that I was there, but as I started to go more and learn more about what Unity was about, specifically in Charleston, Reverend Ed used to say that Unity was the religion of Jesus, not the religion about Jesus. And I always thought that was
Being
such
Jesus like.
yeah, I thought it was such an interesting distinction, because I didn't understand in my own brain, thinking about what I was raised with. It just didn't make sense that people could say they cared so much about this guy and then not behave the way this guy told him to behave. It felt like a
Can you imagine?
massive contradiction.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated the idea. And the longer I went to that church, the more I listened to the way things were framed. I really appreciated the emphasis on the how Jesus moved through the world, how he actually existed in his lifetime while he was a living, breathing human, how he moved through space, and who he cared for, and who he admonished, and who he, more importantly than the fan club, as someone we're going to talk about in a second, John Fugelsang, calls them, the fan club of people who are Jesus adjacent, the ones that are just, I want to go to the church, and I want to, which is, as I understand it now, is kind of the experience that I had in church growing up. It was the Jesus adjacent fan club. It wasn't necessarily about, being a reflection of Jesus as you walked on the earth. So.
And that's the interesting thing. Like when we're talking about what would Jesus do, and what is it like to be Jesus like, or what is it like to be Mohammed like, or what is it like to be Buddha like, or what is it like to be in these models of a guide, for the way I like to think about a blueprint to exist as your best human self, as you're in this presence, if that makes sense, right? Those are the guides to the type of human harmony and interconnectedness that we need to be thinking about as we're moving around and being in relation to one another. And it's really diabolical to me to utilize that sentiment of these really magnificent models of the best parts of humanity and twist that up to say that these models would want to have us acting in opposition or in violence and aggression with one another. It's really very diabolical in its twisting. And it's very interesting that religion has been used to control the masses in so many ways. And it's really unfortunate that US culture is using religion right now, and has used religion in the past, to kind of foster and motivate the opportunity to be in domination over other people, and utilizing Bible verses and this moment in time as like the end days and in the Revelation. And I really appreciated to the episode that we were watching, the Don Lemon episode, talking about Christian nationalism, where Pastor Deese kind of explains a different analysis and way of thinking about and looking at the book of Revelation. But before we go into that, we wanted to define the way that we think about what it is to be Jesus-like. And you had a really good description and example with that I know you wanted to share.
Yeah, just a little quick backstory of the author of this statement that I'm going to share. So John Fugelsang he's in the entertainment business. He does, I think he was on MTV as a VJ at one point. He's had talk shows on Sirius XM. That's how I learned about him. I'm not even sure what he's into these days, but he has a really unique story because his father was a Franciscan brother and his mother was a nun. And of course, they were these things before they knew each other, but they met after having these lives as dedicated within the Catholic faith to God. They met and fell in love and ended up leaving their orders to get married and had John. And so he was raised in a household that, of course, was very religious, but very faith-based, Catholic specifically. And he knows the Bible backwards and forwards, upwards, downwards, sideways. It doesn't matter. He knows everything about what's in it. And he also knows everything about what's not in it and how it's weaponized to find the right scriptures that you can twist in whatever way to justify what you're advocating for people to do. And so this is kind of it made me think of him when we started talking about this Don Lemon video that we watched some of in the last episode, and I'm going to watch some today, because he has this great quote. And I have a t-shirt with this quote on it, and I wear it usually this time every year, right around Easter, because it gets the side eye. It gets some interesting looks, because it to me, it so completely describes who Jesus was, and to the authenticness of who he was, based on how he moved through space instead of what the Jesus adjacent folks would like to say. So I'll add it to the screen here for those that are listening. I'll read it out loud. Jesus was a radical, nonviolent revolutionary who hung around with lepers, hookers, and crooks, wasn't American and never spoke English, was anti-wealth, anti-death penalty, anti-public prayer, but was never anti-gay, never mentioned abortion or birth control, never called the poor lazy, never justified torture, never fought for tax cuts for the wealthiest Nazarenes, never asked a leper for a copay, and was a long-haired, brown-skinned, homeless, community organizing, anti-slut-shaming Middle Eastern Jew.
Well, talk about it. One of my brethren.
Yeah. And I remember when I first saw that quote, I was like, oh, I think I heard him say it first. And then I found the quote in print, and I was like, because it brought together in my mind of growing up in the Episcopal faith and then finding unity and trying to wrap my brain around who this guy was and why people revere him. And then also why people take his words and his deeds and twist them into something I think you've used the term diabolical, and that is it's a great term to describe what we're seeing right now, especially with the war in Iran, and how the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, is using scripture and Bible verses to justify why we're sending troops into harm's way to go kill other people because they're religious zealots. But we're going to use Bible verses to explain why we're sending you to go kill the other people that believe in a religious dogma different than ours, but our religious dogma is better, which is classic religiosity. But I think it's particularly disgusting right now for me. So
especially because the people who are sitting in the audience receiving this are having an aha moment, like pushing back and speaking on. We have one of our leaders who is coming to us having a conversation about war, and they're utilizing the Bible, and they're not saying amen to the responsiveness. They're sitting there and like, this is not what we're used to in the way that we do our politicking.
Yeah.
And so it's becoming something to talk about, because most US citizens are like, this is not how we get down. We don't use the Bible to be the purposefulness, and we don't use like the stories of the Bible. That's not typical of us to be utilizing these things as the impetus for the actions that we're taking for political aggression across the globe. And so folks are in conversation about it. And that's why we're having this conversation today, because it's concerning and I give a fuck about it. Yes. And I don't want it to be happening. Like the other part of it, like I don't want it to be happening. I want people to be able to practice their faith base, and I want people to be able to be elevating humanity through that means of doing it. But I don't want to be using, it's not what Jesus would do, to be using biblical verses to justify going to war and causing harm on other people because you're not getting your way, because you're having a tantrum. And that's bananas to me. That's bananas behavior. And as a parent, as somebody who's a disciplinarian, also, let's step back and check in the impact of the harm that you're creating and the tactics that you're using that are really very dangerous, very dangerous.
Right. Your video keeps freezing a little bit. I keep hearing you, but you're coming in and out. So I apologize if I step on you a little bit, because I can't always know when you're finished talking. But the next clip from this Don Lemon show episode that we were talking about at the last episode, he's speaking to Pastor Cody Deese from Georgia. I guess he has a church outside of Atlanta, and they're having this really deep discussion about Christian nationalism. And the clip that we were going to watch in this episode and talk about a little bit was a breakdown about the book of Revelation. And, this is a part of the Bible that I hear people using all the time as a metaphorical bludgeon as to the end times and all of the mythology, I feel like, that revolves around the book of Revelation. And I think before we came online, or before we came on the recording, you were talking about how folks in your community talk about the book of Revelation and end times and things. And I didn't know if you wanted to speak into like the narratives that you hear in your community about it.
I mean, the place that I have the most conversation about biblical narrative is through my mother, right? And the Black female elders of the Black church. And there's a large demographic of that. Even the folks that are in power now are even calling in that demographic of women to show, hey, I'm grandma, I'm Black church lady. And these are the things that we want to be uplifting in our community. So we're seeing that narrative kind of like have hints of exposure right now in this political climate. But yeah, the end times are here. Be ready to accept and receive, or be in alignment with Jesus is more what is kind of like what the theme is. I haven't been to Black church in years and years and years. And I haven't been in years because I might have told this story previously, but I used to be an avid church goer, Sunday church goer, in church all day from 9 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I enjoyed it. Like, it's fun, because church is not just the word, but it's an experience, right? See, I'm even smiling thinking about it. A wonderful cultural experience. Anybody that's gotten to hear some church music, see some praise dancing, hear some wild word and altar calls. It's just good. It's good entertainment. It's good fun. And it also feeds your spirit in a way that's really completing. But I haven't been because I used to read Bible stories to my young people, and 2 daughters, 2 females. And one day that might have been 8, no, a little older than that, maybe 11 and 7-ish. Okay. And they were like, why are all of these stories so dislike women so much? They didn't use the word misogynist, but they were like, all of the Bible stories just hate and dislike and talk about women so bad. I don't understand. Like, aren't we girls? Aren't we women? These are my little young people that said this to me. When that had me going to a reflection of the stories and the way that women are talked about in the Bible. So they're commodified, they're stoned, they're called Jezebel spirits, and all of this very unhealthy. And I didn't actually recognize that. And then the relationship with male to female, the male is the head. So all of these kind of cultural narratives and the storytelling that my very, very young female daughters were made aware of to them, like it felt to them like an aggression. And at that age, so then that's when I was just like, that's not the teaching. I don't want you as female-bodied Black people growing up in the US to hold these narratives that don't position you in a place of power. And in the same way with the educational system. When I got that notification after my older daughter went to school, I took my other one out because I want you to be able to be educated and knowledge brought forth out of you from a place of empowerment, very much like white males do, because I was raised in a white male privileged system. And so I believe in creating positions of power out of that understanding. And how do you do that? Is you take yourself out of being indoctrinated by those who would position you less than what you actually are. Okay. And so that's why I haven't been to church in a long time, but that doesn't mean that I am not rooted in a lot of the faith-based understanding. I was talking to my mother about that this weekend. I feel very blessed of having had a lot of experiences with a lot of different faith understanding, so I could develop in my own understanding of faith that I have now. And I think my young people are really good at creating that for themselves as well. That being said, when we talk about the end times and the second coming or the third coming, Christ being here, because the second coming of Christ is more our foundation out of like Jewish tradition, Jewish faith-based tradition. And in the traditional Black church faith, we always know that Jesus is coming because we have always been in the position of the oppressed. And so we've always looked for that as the place of comfort and safety that you had mentioned previously before. I hope that answers your question, but it's always been a constant state of chaos and horror because I have been raised in U.S. tradition where a lot of oppression is experienced from the day you're born. Yeah. I don't even know how else to say that. Where is Jesus? Jesus is coming. This is all Armageddon.
Yeah.
And this is always the end days because there's so much harm, violence, and chaos, and that's consistent.
Yeah.
Consistent. So how about you?
Interesting. I don't really remember hearing a lot about, Book of Revelation, except I think I've heard it more in places other than church settings in my adult life than I ever did in church settings. And I don't know if that's a difference in just culturally speaking in terms of the church experience, but we didn't talk a lot about end times. I don't remember conversations about that kind of stuff. Which, makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense because for me, anybody that looks like me, the end of the world is way far away, right? Because this entire society is built for my comfort. So it makes sense that, the only time I hear about it, and I don't know a lot about the Book of Revelation. That's one of the reasons why this clip that we're going to show, it was so fascinating to me because I don't know a lot about it. I know talking about the rapture. I know talking about end times and what that might look like. I couldn't tell you what the signs are, but I know that there are signs. And but I do know that it's often used when I hear people using information from the Bible to justify fear, intimidation, power structure over power domination, that kind of thing. It usually comes somewhere along the lines the Book of Revelation is mentioned. And so when I saw this clip, when I watched this video on your recommendation, and I saw them talking about the Book of Revelation and what it actually means and where it actually comes from, it was really fascinating to me. It's just another example of how twisted, you can take the Bible. I mean, we know that whiteness has been twisting the Bible since, back in the early days of the settler colonial project that is Turtle Island, in terms of trying to keep Black people enslaved, and only giving them certain things to read so that they would be supposedly told by the Bible that they need to be in bondage. So we know that we've been weaponizing it for a long time, but I thought this, it's not surprising to me that I had a very different experience than you did. So. But should we watch this clip? We've been talking about it for a while. So. Let's watch this clip, and then we'll talk about it on the back side. Yeah.
Worth talking about. So let me just start here. Revelation, and this may be hard for some of your listeners. Others of them may be like right on. But it's important for us to say this right now in America in 2026 with Pete Hegseth spouting off about a book that he knows nothing about, okay? Revelation is not a future prediction about the end of the world. I want to repeat that for America to hear. Revelation is not a future prediction about the end of the world. All right. This is apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic literature is a style of writing that uses symbols, visions, and cosmic imagery to reveal how God is at work behind the scenes. Okay. This book is written by real people, a real man named John, who was exiled by the Empire of Rome. And he's writing it to 7 churches, real people that are being oppressed by a global military superpower. And what John is doing is he's writing in a particular literature that would be like, Don, like the sci-fi of our day. All right. And he's not writing about 2026 in Iran. He's not writing about America. This may shock a lot of people, but America's not in the Bible. Now, I know we think we're the center of everything, but we're not the center of the biblical narrative. It's not in the book of Revelation. He's not writing about some future. I'm going to throw this out there. The Antichrist is not someone that's coming. All right. So we just need to pause all of that because, first of all, Antichrist is not even in the book of Revelation. All right. What you have is 2 beasts in the book of Revelation. In that first beast that John is writing about, it says he has 7 heads. Okay. What is that beast? That beast is the Roman Empire of his day. This man is writing in the late 1st century about real things that are happening in real time to real people in his moment. And he is describing using symbols in language because he knows if he comes outright blatantly and says these things, first of all, he will be killed himself. Okay. So he's writing with these symbols in language and he's trying to help the Jesus followers of the day. And he's challenging them and he's encouraging them. And he is saying ultimately, Don, he's saying this. He is saying, come out of the empire. Do not be seduced
Ding, 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 ding.
by what they're trying to lure you into. He's trying to reveal the violence of empire, the lies of empire, and he's calling his people to come out of that empire. And the way he does that is he is using this language to, and here's the word, Don, apocalypse. Now we have this modern understanding of apocalypse, which is this idea that there's going to be some end of the world type scenario. But in its original phrase, apocalypse, the actual word behind it is unveiling. So this is why the book is called Revelation. It is
so interesting. So
no, that's super, super, super powerful. And I'm really glad that he made that distinction. And the thing that I do appreciate about what I call the guidebooks, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the Bhagavad Gita, is that you can relate what was going on during the period that those books were erected to they hold the test of time because they can be related to what's going on right now. If we were doing our book of Revelation, if we were being apocalyptic, if we were revealing the times, we would be blah, 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 blah. We would be revealing the times and we would be inviting people out of this narrative that empire, that U.S. empire is pushing at this moment. We would be doing the same things that was being, which was the purposefulness of Revelation. We would be asking people to look at the way our administration is going, look at the harm to humanity and society. How do we do what Jesus would do, become more Jesus-like, and put down our guns, put down our nuclear, put down this hate, put down this violence against each other, recognize that we can evolve more because there's enough resources if we're utilizing our resources appropriately for all of us to exist harmoniously amongst each other. And that's what Jesus would do. That is what Jesus would do. But and because let me get on my pedestal. But
go ahead. The microphone is yours.
If we move further down in the clip, what we know about like bully nature, which the United States exists on, is that when a bully gets cornered, they're going to try every form of tactic that they can to claw their ways out of the corner. Mm-hmm. And white males in particular right now have been shouting it from the rooftop that they feel persecuted. Yes. And when white males feel persecuted, I will say time and time again, people die.
Yeah.
And people are dying across the globe.
I got nothing to say after that. I got nothing to say. That's it.
That is it. Until next time. Until next time.
Why do I give a fuck?
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why
do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.